For Telestar, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin once again with a developing story in Mali. A hostage situation there has come to an end after gunmen took control of the Radisson Hotel there in the capital city of Bamako. Now, the United Nations right now is reporting that 27 bodies were found inside the hotel. Again, at least 27 people are dead. Now, at least 80 prisoners were set free after commando forces entered the hotel earlier in the day. We should say hostages were set free. Now, we can report that the security minister said that the gunmen were quote, holding no more hostages. That's according to the security minister. The siege was orchestrated, we know, by the Al-Qaeda-linked Islamist group Al-Morhabitun. Now, the group has already claimed responsible for this attack. Continue to follow our website for the latest on this story. The rescue operation, we do know, took several hours after the commando forces from Mali's government entered that hotel. The U.S. Africa Command said through its Twitter account that it had provided a small group of special forces to help the Mali government in this rescue effort. We're seeing video here of what appears to be footage from inside that hotel. United Nations personnel came to the scene at that hotel and are currently investigating exactly what happened during this incident. We turn to Latin America now. The Colombian military has killed one campesino after attacking a rural town in the Cauca province. Now, the clashes left another 3 campesinos severely wounded. The army says the area was used for illegal crops. However, human rights activists are criticizing the brutality of the attack. According to locals, the army burnt crops and arbitrarily entered the homes of residents. Former Senator and human rights activist Piedad Córdoba said more recent reports claim wider abuse by the army.
The army brutally entered Argelia in Cauca province, burning homes, burning cars, attacking people instead of speaking with the community, justifying themselves with the argument that they are stopping illegal crops that would be used to produce drugs. The army should call all of the people and organizations that work with social movements to sit down and agree on another way of doing things. The army brutally entered Argelia in Cauca province, burning.
Meanwhile, as Colombia's peace talks in Havana continue, some have started to speculate that possibly an agreement could be reached sooner than previously expected. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita now with more on that possibility.
It's been 3 years since the Colombian government and the FARC rebels began peace talks with a 6-point negotiation agenda. Having already reached significant agreements over 4 of the points, the question on how the final agreements will be ratified by Colombians has sparked debate in the Congress.
Whatever the ratification mechanism, it must ensure faithfulness with what has been agreed. It cannot be that government and the FARC spend 3 to 4 years discussing and reaching agreements, and then those agreements end up disfigured by the Congress or any other body. That simply just can't happen.
At stake is not just the ratification of the peace deal, but also the issue of turning the agreements into law so that they can be successfully implemented. So far, the method of ratification that has been backed by the president and passed by the Congress is a plebiscite, which at least 4 million Colombians will have to approve in order to succeed.
There should be a fast and responsive mechanism, such as a plebiscite, but the plebiscite should leave open and active the possibility for a constituent process. I believe that is a reasonable proposal to move forward in this debate that is understandably very difficult.
The FARC has insisted the agreement should be ratified by a constituent assembly of people from all political currents, rather than a plebiscite in which Colombians will vote either yes or no, and that for some sectors is a dangerous move, especially within an electoral system known for its lack of transparency and corruption.
There are too many elements to be suspicious about, mainly a powerful political class that only wants the FARC to give up their weapons and isolate themselves in the countryside, but they don't want any sort of deep reforms. Those are the reforms to be discussed in the plebiscite, so it's not as easy as just saying yes or no to the agreements.
Beyond the debate, what the FARC has strongly complained about is that the mechanism for ratification, which is part of the negotiation agenda, is not being discussed within the peace talks, but rather imposed to them, which they have said breaks the bilateral principle of the negotiations. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
Presidential candidates Daniel Scioli and Mauricio Macri have closed their campaigns ahead of Sunday's elections in Argentina. Now, candidate Daniel Scioli highlighted once again that his government would not carry out large privatizations or other measures that would put in danger the social gains of the last decade. He further committed to governing in favor of the Argentinian people.
Those are absolute priorities. The poor, workers, our middle class, and the youth, who are not the future but the great present of Argentina. Go defend your future.
And Mauricio Macri also closed his campaign, and it came as information emerged about his collusion with U.S. strategists. Now, a WikiLeaks cable revealed by the Center for Economic Policy and Research in Washington shows that Macri asked the United States for help to confront the governments of Mr. Kirchner and current President Cristina Fernandez. And as we see here, that cable shows that Macri had met with then Secretary for the Western Hemisphere in the United States, Thomas Shannon, and had urged him to, quote, set limits on the Kirchner's misbehavior, unquote. Furthermore, the same cable shows that Macri announced his presidential bid to the U.S. Embassy in 2009. And to talk more about the current atmosphere there in Argentina as the country prepares for these very historic and very important presidential elections, we turn to our correspondent, Leo Poletti-Caduti. Leo, how determining is Macri's relationship with the U.S. Embassy? What other information have we learned about his relationship?
Cody, we know quite a bit about Mauricio Macri's relations with the US Embassy. Only a few years back did we learn of some WikiLeaks cables which shed the light on this exact topic. It was back in 2006 in a meeting Mauricio Macri had at the US Embassy here in Buenos Aires, where he went to the embassy and spoke to the ambassador, the US ambassador who was serving his post here at that time, and basically outlined what he and his party was all about. And we learned in that 2006 cable, thanks to WikiLeaks, that he said that the Pro Party, which he leads, is the first political force in 80 years of Argentine political history, or at least in the last 80 years in Argentine political history, which is truly pro-market and truly pro-business and with real conditions of taking power. In another meeting he had with the US Embassy, and we also learned this thanks to WikiLeaks, Macri asked the US Embassy, and it must be said on at least 5 different occasions, to harshly criticise in public the government of Cristina Fernandez to win voters. Apart from this, we know, or there is substantial evidence which indicates that Mauricio Macri and his right-wing pro-party has a vast relationship with big business, has a vast relationship with Washington, and really you just have to look back into Argentine political history to understand what the pro-party means and who it's come to take the post from. Many here in Argentina say the pro-party is a continuation of what was the brutal 1976 to 1983 civil military dictatorship, where a lot of sectors of corporations made huge profits and gained substantially from that brutal civil military dictatorship, which where 30,000 Argentines sadly perished. Now, the other question perhaps has to do with, has this made an impact on Argentine media? The answer to that is basically no. In these last few weeks, at least, of the campaign, these substantial pieces of evidence linking Macri to big business, linking Macri to Washington, have basically not appeared in the monopolised mainstream media, who have chosen to not talk about these very delicate issues. Cody.
Leo, very quickly, let's talk about the election specifically. We know a lot of Argentinians haven't even made their mind up, and we're also hearing talks about some people who have decided they will cast their voto en blanco, as it's called there. Explain to us those phenomenons going on there.
Cody, what really must be said before we do go on in relation to your question is that pollsters, opinion polls, have been getting their facts pretty wrong in the last few elections, at least here in Argentina. So really what opinion pollsters are saying must be taken with a grain of salt. What we can say is that it is expected on Sunday, when the runoff election is held here in Argentina, that the turnout will be pretty big. It is expected that around 80% of the electorate will turn up to the different polling stations by Argentina. So the turnout is expected to be big. And in relation to the split vote, or as it's called in Spanish or here in Argentina, votos en blanco, to these opinion polls, they're talking that it'll be around 3 to 4% of the share of the votes that will be spoiled votes, votos. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens on Sunday. See how the spoiled votes affect the Argentine presidential runoff. So recapping, 80% of the electorate is expected to turn up for this very polarised poll on Sunday, just 48 hours away. Cody.
Well, we will be turning to you, Leo, as Sunday unfolds for more on those elections in Argentina. Leo, thank you.
Thank you, a pleasure.
Moving on now, a recent landslide in a luxury neighborhood in Mexico City has prompted some neighbors, activists, and opposition lawmakers to call attention to what many say is a widespread problem of political and real estate corruption. Our correspondent Clayton Kahn now reports.
Here, teetering on this cliffside, is just one building of a luxury residential complex that amounts to 60 apartments over an area of 29,124 square meters. In late October, a series of landslides put the residents and their properties at serious risk. The authorities say they're investigating.
The study can take up to 3 weeks, with experts from both the federal government and from the National Autonomous University. We want to be sure, with security, when these studies are finished.
However, residents and workers at the high-end complex called Vista del Campo were told otherwise, that although work is being carried out to repair the structural damage, everything is fine.
Well, what I know is that they gave us the instructions that nothing is going to happen, that we should be calm, and that this is not going to affect anyone.
Yet, some residents of Vista del Campo, which is part of Mexico City's rapidly growing elite Santa Fe neighborhood, are filing lawsuits, claiming that a mixture of political corruption and failure by real estate developers to follow protocols and acquire permits is behind the landslide. Analysts argue that the problem behind me represents only the tip of the iceberg. While urban studies academic Ivana Suara points out that at least 70% of Santa Fe's territory, originally categorized as protected, has been invaded by luxury urban developments, it is only symptomatic of a citywide phenomena.
This is a powder keg. Imagine deregulation for years with the lack of risk and environmental impact studies, which have not been carried out for many buildings. And so we are truly at the first show of the consequences that can be caused by evading these norms and allowing this deregulation in favor of big capital.
And what Asuara and other analysts have pointed out is that this mixture of real estate and political corruption has prompted further gentrification, social inequality, and the construction of at least 281,000 buildings that have been deemed unsafe. Clayton Kahn, Telesur, Mexico City.
And a looming migrant crisis continues in Central America. Some 2,000 Cuban nationals have been left stranded in the region while trying to reach the United States. The Central American nations are holding conversations with the United States to find a solution to this crisis. Nicaragua requested the regional nations to discuss the issue in the upcoming Central America Integration Summit. And Cuban migrants are rushing to the United States because they fear that once relations are normalized, they will lose migratory privileges under the Cuban Adjustment Act. Now, that bill was passed by the U.S. during the Cold War, and it aims to promote Cuban artists and intellectuals to leave the island. And through this law, Cuban nationals can obtain permanent U.S. residency, the so-called green card, after a year of physically being in the country. European Union interior ministers are considering creating a European equivalent of the CIA. Now, we'll have more details on that organization when we come back. That have marked the course of history. Productions designed in the English language and made for the English-speaking world. This is Documentary. Watch it on telesur.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
Wherever the news, you'll be there.
After a startling report released by the Washington Post, it shows that police in the United States will kill over 1,000 people this year. Now, in light of those numbers, human rights activists are urging local governments to expand the use of body cameras for police officers. Over 850 of those 1,000 deaths will be caused by gunfire. On a similar note, the U.S. Congress voted yesterday to approve a new set of measures which will make the arrival of Syrian refugees difficult. The new bill would implement harsher security screenings targeting Syrian nationals. The bill will now go to the Senate, but President Barack Obama has announced he will veto it. French prosecutors have revealed that a third body was recovered from an apartment in the Paris suburb of Saint Denis that was raided by police this week. The body was found overnight among the rubble in a search of the apartment following Wednesday morning's raid, which ended with an explosion and gunfire. A spokesperson said the identity of the body has not been confirmed. The cause of death remains unknown. In Brussels now, EU ministers are meeting to discuss security measures, including the creation of a European intelligence agency. In the wake of the Paris attacks that killed 130 people a week ago today, numerous failings have been identified, driving calls from the European Commission for increased cooperation. At the meeting, EU interior ministers have already agreed to increase security checks for all travelers entering the Schengen area, including European citizens.
After Charlie Hebdo, I had proposed, and finally it was done, the creation of the counter-terrorism center at Europol. I believe it is a moment to make one more step forward and put the basis for the creation of a European intelligence agency.
German special forces seized police uniforms and gas cylinders at a hotel in Munich on Thursday night. A hotel employee overheard guests discussing imminent action and informed the police. The gas cylinders and police uniforms were found in the hotel room and 4 people were arrested. Another 4 suspects are believed to have escaped from that scene. Greece has approved a reform bill which paves the way for the release of further bailout funds from its international lenders. But Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras' parliamentary majority shrank after 2 dissenting lawmakers were expelled. The bill outlining regulation on taxes, austerity measures, and home foreclosures is set to unlock a €2 billion loan. Italian military police prevented an alleged mafia plot to murder Italian Interior Minister Angelio Alfano after they conducted a raid in the Sicilian town of Corleone. Police arrested 6 members of the so-called Cosa Nostra mafia gang after wiretapped conversations revealed the mafia group was plotting against the minister for his stance against organized crime. After serving 30 years of a life sentence in jail, an Israeli spy, Jonathan Pollard, has been released on parole from a U.S. prison. The 60-year-old is a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer who was convicted for turning over classified information to Israel. In the 1990s, Israel admitted Poland was its agent and granted him citizenship. However, the terms of his parole require him to remain in the U.S. for at least 5 years. Pollard's supporters, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, are seeking permission for him to move to Israel immediately. During a day of rage protests in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, Palestinian protesters clashed with Israeli soldiers in the city of Hebron. Hundreds took to the streets after attending a funeral procession for Palestinian Raed Haradat. He was shot and killed by Israeli police. Israeli police said he wounded an Israeli soldier. And in the city of Bethlehem, Palestinian youth threw stones at Israeli soldiers who responded with tear gas. The people of New Zealand have been making sure their voices are heard against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The trade deal will help pharmaceutical companies and will raise the cost of medicines. New Zealand's involvement in the TPP has been the target of ongoing protests in Auckland. According to witnesses and a security source, Al-Qaeda militants killed at least 15 Yemeni soldiers in an attack on a military post. The source added in the same attack, some 14 militants were also killed. The attack began when a suicide bomber detonated an explosive in his car at the military post. Following the blast, the assault began. Saudi Arabia says it's organizing a summit to unite the Syrian opposition in December. The announcement has raised concerns among experts due to the support of the Saudi kingdom to the most radical forms of Islamic doctrine. Saudi Arabia has been a fierce opponent of Bashar al-Assad's government, and it is yet unclear if the summit will further complicate a peaceful solution to the country's civil war. The ASEAN summit kicked off in Malaysia. The bloc of 10 nations will discuss regional issues and the economy. However, the most pressing issue that will likely dominate the agenda there will be the South China Sea dispute. The countries have vowed to come up with a code of conduct to avoid escalations while the territorial disputes are settled.
It's no surprise that countries look for measures to negate any legality of that's illegal dash line. So we have not only the Philippines but also other 3 ASEAN countries as claimants in this dispute. So each country is entitled, had the right to, seek its own, part towards the solution of the dispute, as long as it is peaceful, and it's.
With the upcoming Rio Olympics on Thursday, a top official said terrorism is the main security fear. Brazil has never been targeted by Islamist groups. Many say that's due to Brazil's low profile in international conflicts. However, some fear the presence of world leaders and the media focus on the country could put Brazil at risk. Bolivian construction workers have discovered archaeological remains believed to date back to the pre-Colombian Tiwakanu society. The remains were discovered while the workers were excavating new lines for an aerial tramway in the capital La Paz. According to local archaeologists, this is the first time such an ancient discovery has been made in the capital's urban center. The remains have been dated to 100 or 200 BC. The findings include ceramic shards from urns, crude cutting tools, and bones of a llama that may have been used as a sacrifice. At the National Grand Theater in Beijing, renowned Russian choreographer Boris Eifman prepared the final rehearsal on Thursday for the opening night of his ballet Anna Karenina. Now, the ballet will stage in the National Center for the Performing Arts in Beijing from the 20th to the 21st of November. The ballet is Eifman's longest tour in the 40-year history of the Russian ballet company. The ballet is one of the most popular in Eifman's repertoire, having been shown on nearly every continent in the 10 years since its premiere. As we're covering plenty more on all of those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend.